Hey guys, it's another episode of Churchy Words with Pastor Charles. Today we're going to talk about fonts. This is Times New Roman font. This is called Arial. This font is called Comic Sans, and don't ever use this font. But today's font that we're going to talk about is a baptismal font.
Oh, Dad, you and your jokes.
What can I say? So today on Churchy Words with Pastor Charles, we're going to check out our baptismal font and learn what it's all about. In the Christian world, a baptismal font is not a fancy script style or writing style. It's actually a piece of furniture that we have right here in our sanctuary. Specifically, the baptismal font is the receptacle in which water is held for baptism, which is one of the most important rituals in Christian churches. Ours looks like this. It has a lid and a bowl that sits down inside to hold the water. Baptism itself, the act of baptism, signifies the washing away of our sins and accepting the person being baptized into the family of Christ and into the Christian church. It represents forgiving our past bad behaviors and doing so through our faith in Jesus Christ and his resurrection. So, while some of the fonts are used to write things down, the baptismal font instead is used to erase things. See, baptism as a one-time ritual of cleansing, accepting, is really, really unique to Christianity, as is the baptismal font in which most baptisms take place. However, these fonts have actually their roots or their history in Jewish rituals. See, it was the act of cleansing which was very important to the early Jewish people and still today is a very, very important part of Judaism. And various acts of cleansing had to occur before people could participate in other religious rituals or ceremonies within the Jewish temple. Traditionally, however, these cleansing ceremonies were supposed to take place outside, outdoors, in a natural source of clean water, something like a river. In fact, the cleansing of Christ in the River Jordan, often today called the baptism of Christ by John the Baptist, is a major point in Christian history. So how did we go from this outdoor activity to an indoor one with this and or other types of baptismal fonts? Well, early Christians, who were mostly located around the Roman Empire, continued the Jewish cleansing rituals, but they really transformed it. Since Christ absolved all sins, you only had to be cleansed of them one time when you adopted the Christian faith. Thus, the Christian baptism was established in the early church. The problem was that Christians were heavily persecuted. In other words, or that's another way of saying they were sometimes hurt or beaten or even killed for believing what they believed about Christ. Going to the rivers for a mass gathering and to do baptisms wasn't really a great idea for them. So they developed baptism rituals in private places, like people's homes sometimes. Some of the oldest baptismal fonts in the Christian world can actually be found in the catacombs in Rome, which are places underneath the ground in Rome, where Christians used to meet to worship God in secret so people wouldn't know. So shallow reservoirs were carved into the rocks underground and were there to collect natural spring water, letting Christians baptize new people into the faith without fear of being seen by other people. In fact, the word font actually comes from the Latin word for fountain. Fountain, font. Early Christian art from those early centuries of the church often depict baptisms of this kind. The person standing in like a sort of a big think of like a kiddie pool with an it would be ankle deep water, sort of, then having the water poured over the top of their head from like a vase or a pitcher. As Christianity sort of grew and became more mainstream, though, baptismal fonts came to take on several different shapes and sizes. Some were full, like pools of water inside private homes. Other were simple vases. Even after Christianity was legalized in Rome, baptismal fonts varied all around the Mediterranean area. But with the growth of Christian architecture, baptismal fonts took on new meaning as important ritual objects, and therefore visual focal points. Church designers and artists in the medieval era and Renaissance, baptismal fonts were often covered in ornate relics depicting scenes from the Gospels, the lives of saints, or even maybe patron donors of the early church. It's interesting to learn that throughout this time, the baptismal fonts were often found not in the church, but outside the actual church itself. In some places, like in Florence, Italy, it was believed that only those who had already been brought in or initiated into the church should be allowed inside a great cathedral. And as a result, baptisms occurred outside in a separate building that they called the baptistry. So baptismal fonts do look different all around the world, partly since the actual ritual of baptism has changed so much. Some people still practice what's called full immersion, or that's where you dunk the person's whole body in water. Others believe in pouring water over the head, and some believe in sprinkling of water on the forehead. That's kind of what we tend to do here at Grandview. We take some water from the font and we'll place it on the head of the person being baptized. Each form of baptism utilizes a different baptismal font, though. But there is one thing that most of them have in common. They tend to be 8-sided, just like ours. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So why are they 8-sided? Well, 8-sided fonts are actually to recall the 8th day, which in Christian history or Christian imagination is the first day of the resurrection of Christ. There was a man a long time ago named St. Augustine, who was a brilliant Christian scholar from around 1600 years ago. He wrote about the 8th day, the day of the Lord, an everlasting 8th day. Now, about the same time, St. Ambrose, also a great scholar, explained that the certain font being octagonal, or that's another word for 8-sided, because the 8th day, by rising from the tomb, Christ loosens the bondage of death and receives dead from their graves. In other words, our baptismal font has 8 sides to remind us that Christ rising from the grave is the reason that our baptism and welcoming into the church matters. Without Jesus dying and rising again, we wouldn't be able to be forgiven just by being baptized. Kind of amazing stuff, huh? So, now that you know the difference between a font and a baptismal font, next time you're in the sanctuary, come take a look. Come see our baptismal, see how it has 8 sides. You're even welcome with an adult or with someone's help to take the top off and look down inside of it and explore it and get to know our baptismal font and why it's so important to us here at Grandview and why it's so important to the Christian church. Hope you guys enjoyed this. See you next time.